All right. I think we are up and running. It looks like I got audio going into OBS. On the right scene, let me shuffle around the chat windows. Twitch here. And I don't hear myself, which is good. We're paused. My bitrate shows kind of low. I wonder... if it's scaled. Downscale filter. Video bitrate. Recordings. Streaming. So I don't know if this can change live. Hopefully I don't break the stream doing this. I'm gonna try to make this change though. Okay, that gets us closer to 4,000. Does that ever change over here? 853. Yeah, that does change. Okay, so I can do that live. And now Restream is a little bit happier with the bitrate. Sorry folks, I tweaked some settings the other day inside OBS on Monday when I made a backup recording of the CircuitPython weekly meeting. And I think whatever I did, I ended up with a lower bitrate than what Restream is happy with. So I think we got that tweaked now. This is now happy. This is paused. Chats are back. Okay. Lotion on the floor. Let me put that back up. I have to put some on in a minute. All right. So, introduction for folks that might not know. My name is Tim. I go by foamyguy on GitHub and Discord. We're going to be working on CircuitPython projects. In specific, we're going to be working on Displayio layout, the grid layout, and we're trying to center stuff inside the cells of the grid. If you are not familiar with any of that at all, the best place to start is circuitpython.org. This will tell you about CircuitPython. It's basically a version of Python that can run on these tiny computers that are called microcontrollers. There's a bunch of different pictures of them in the background here, so you can see they come in all different shapes and sizes. Some of them have screens, some of them have more pins, some of them have less pins, some of them have built-in lights and speakers and all kinds of different things. Today we'll be looking at Displayio CircuitPython code. So basically this is going to be targeted at devices that have a screen, like this Pi portal right here. There's a couple others in the background here, Halloween, Pi badge. These all have built-in screens, and that is kind of what we're messing with today. Thank you, Dexter. Appreciate it. The check on the audio there. And how's it going? Hope you're having a good day so far. So yeah, that's what CircuitPython is all about. If you're interested in getting involved in the project, there's a couple of ways you can do it. If you go to circuitpython.org, there's a contributing link at the top. This is going to take you to the open pull requests and issues, which are great places to get started if you're new. Inside of issues, there's even a filter for good first issues. So this is kind of like the lowest hanging fruit. If you are really new to all of this, but you're looking to get involved, good first issues are things to look for. And right now, a lot of them are going to be these type annotation issues where you can go and fill in type annotations for the various different CircuitPython libraries. It's basically looking at the functions, figuring out what the types of the arguments are supposed to be, figuring out what the types of the returns are supposed to be, and filling those into the code. So you don't have to have a whole lot of experience with CircuitPython. You kind of basically just need to be able to read Python code a little bit and reason about it and determine the types of objects based on the way that they are used. So that's a really good place to start. If you don't want to necessarily get your hands dirty and get involved in coding or helping out on GitHub by reviewing or anything like that, another thing you can do is purchase hardware from Adafruit. This is their website, adafruit.com. It looks like they're still doing a special this weekend, so if you do purchase hardware from them this weekend, today is the 27th, so my guess is this goes maybe until the end of today or until maybe the end of tomorrow. I'm not actually 100% sure, but if you get it in quick, within the next day or so, as of the time of this recording, then there's also a code you can use to get a discount for this weekend. So, and the big deal about this is these are the folks that provide the financial backing for CircuitPython, right? So they're paying, the folks that are working on the CircuitPython core, they're paying the folks that are working on libraries and fostering the community around the project. They're paying those folks, as a full-time job to work on that stuff. So if you purchase hardware from them, you are indirectly supporting the CircuitPython project, which of course is a great thing to do, in my opinion. So we are going to go ahead and jump in. And again, today I'm looking at Displayio stuff, and specifically I'm looking at grid layout, which is an object that's inside of Displayio layout. And I'm trying to make it to where you can center the contents inside of each of the grid cells. And if you don't know what's going on with grid layout, don't worry. I'll be running an example here in a minute that will show you and make it real clear what grid layout is all about. I'm going to lotion up my hands just a little bit. I got some really dry hands right now. But they're getting better each day as I use this really good lotion I got. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to check out what's this PR. There's an open PR. Oh, is that mine? I think it's mine, right? Yeah, allow. Yeah, this was mine. Okay, so we can't review it because it is mine. If anyone who's watching is interested in getting involved in reviewing, we could use a review on this PR. It's basically just making one of the imports optional inside of this Displayio layout library, which is nice because then you can use it in context without vector.io, which is the import that we're making optional, such as Blinka Displayio, which is how I will be working a little bit today, and then eventually we'll move over to an actual device as well. All right, got the hands good now. So let me, well, actually, I want to do one more thing as well before I do jump into this. I have a review that I owe Fantastic Dan on, is it on Awesome CircuitPython or was it on CircuitPython.org? If you don't know what Awesome CircuitPython is, this is basically a list of just cool links and resources and things for CircuitPython. Maybe it got merged? It did get merged. Okay, so somebody else got the review. And it looks like got the review. Oh, only 9 minutes ago, so I was pretty close, but just a little bit slow. So we are good there. Yeah, I was going to leave a review on this one if it hadn't been done yet. So thank you again. If Fantastic Dan happens to watch this, thank you again for all your work on the Awesome CircuitPython and suggestions for how to handle the video, stuff like that, and fixing up the image as well. How's it going, Deshipu? Okay. So yeah, that review is done actually, so we can just jump into Displayio layout stuff. Let me open up, did I leave this in bitmap font, I think? So this stems from a question somebody asked yesterday in Help with CircuitPython Room, and it's basically trying to use, so specifically it's trying to use font awesome icons and put them inside of a grid layout, and then ideally center the icons inside of each cell. And so as you can see, these ones are, kind of sort of in the center a little bit. It's not quite perfect. There's more space on the right side of this than there is the left side of this. The opposite is true for this one. There's more space on the left than there is the right, since this icon is wider than this one. The bit bucket there, it's got more space on the right than the left because it's back to being taller than it is wide, so on and so forth. So, these It's not terrible, but it's also not perfectly centered, and I think it'd be great if we had a way to tell the grid layout to center these things inside of each of the cells. So that's what I'm going to try to do today to start out with, and I think I'm going to make one attempt at first. I'm going to try doing this without modifying the grid layout just to see if there is a way to do this. I tried this yesterday and did not manage to get it working, but I didn't try that many different things, so maybe there's a chance this could still work. But ultimately, I think what we want is to modify grid layout and add a new feature where you can define the gravity for the cell contents, basically. So this is what it looks like without any padding on it. So that extra space that we had a moment ago was coming from the cell padding. So right now our contents are in the top left. Each one of our contents are their own label, and they happen to be using the Font Awesome font, which if you don't know anything about that, there's an example in the bitmap font library that you can check out. And there's also a blog post that Jeff made a little while back. Jeff did the initial work on bringing Font Awesome icons to CircuitPython. So there's a blog post you can read a bit about the history of it. Realistically, the actual things that are inside the cells don't matter. I would like to make it to where we can center anything inside the cells. Font Awesome icons or just regular labels with words or anything else, ideally. But I will keep working on this since that was the specific question that was asked. So the first thing I'm going to try is making a group and putting the label into the group, and then moving the label within the group, and then adding the group to the grid layout instead of the label. So I'm just going to do it with one to start with. I'm going to make a group, Displayio.group, and I'm going to go group.append. So now we're creating a new label. We're adding it to this group. I think I'm also going to make this into a variable. Eventually we could maybe go back to doing it in line like this, but to make things a little easier, I think I'd rather have a variable here. So then we would append label to the group. And it seems counterintuitive, but it just happens to be the way this code is written, is that everything gets added to this list called labels. And then at the end, we basically iterate through the list. Well, it's not even iterating, actually, but it could be iterating. It's essentially going through each item in the list, adding it to the grid layout. So if we add our thing, whatever it is, into underscore labels, see, we're also already using label here. If we add our thing to this group, this list rather, then it will get put into the grid layout. So this list is called labels, and I'm about to add a group to it, which doesn't make sense from the code naming perspective, but from the logic, I think it will do what we want. I'm going to call this one actually middle top label. You know, if we go back to doing this in a loop or something like that, then obviously we wouldn't need to give a name to each one. We probably wouldn't want to make names like this for every one of them anyway. But in the interest of just doing one and seeing what we can do with it, I'm going to rename it, since this down here already is using label. Okay, so we made a group. We added the label to the group instead of the list. Right here, we added the group to the list, and now that group will get added into the grid down here. So I'm going to run this right now, and it is going to look the same as it did a minute ago. That's what I believe. Nope, it's going to crash. Group doesn't have bounding box. Right, so this is trying to print the bounding box, which doesn't exist on group. But it's really just for debugging. Maybe I messed this up yesterday because I felt like I tried this yesterday, and I don't think it crashed like that, so I must not have done something correctly. So we're just gonna pass, because this is really just debugging output anyway. You know what? Actually, I added this. I added this after I got done testing yesterday. That's why it worked when I tried it. Yeah, I added this to try to find the width and height of each label. Yeah, so we'll just pass. That's fine for now. One thing I do see is something is still using max size. I'll entertain that rabbit hole for just a minute. Let's see. There's no max size in here. Where would that be coming from? Grid layout extends group. Super init. This is where we could have been passing max size previously. We don't need to anymore, but we're not. So that's not where this is printing from. And this doesn't, max size is not in here either. So we've repeated this code. This is kind of a quickly thrown together example. I guess inside of here, but this is not making a group. So how many of these do we get? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 2 times the number of labels that we have. Is it actually using this? What if we not? I don't really want to refactor though, truthfully. I just want to rename it. So this is one thing where PyCharm tries to be a little bit too smart for its own good. Well, for my own good, I guess. Because I want to rename this, and I understand that will make the code break, but it wants to refactor it, to go and change all the usages of it so that the code won't break. But really what I want is for the code to break right now. So I want to run this again and see if we still get all those prints. Okay, or if we fail because we don't have the library, which is the case. So it's definitely was using this. So inside of label constructor? Inside of label constructor. Yeah. Okay, yeah, this has max glyphs. Yeah. This is an old version of display text. Okay. Yeah, because we don't need this anymore. And that's exactly what the warning is telling us. And this would have been passing max size, yeah, to the group. Okay, so we can cancel. I don't want to edit this. Go away. We can just install the new display text, I think. I'm just going to install it with pip. Oh, we don't have the... Interesting, we don't have the installing section on this guide. Lots of guides will have a little section in the README that says, like, run this command to install it. It's the pip command. Pip install. Is it upgrade? Update? Update? No such option. Is it upgrade? Yeah, there it is. Upgrade. Okay. This is installed now. It will still fail because I haven't renamed this back yet. Let's do that. Okay. So this is the one that has the group, and right now it has the label in the default location, which is 0x and negative half the height y. So basically the top half of this icon is above the screen. We can't see it. Which seems weird, but does make sense, because that's how label works by default. So if we change this label, let's say we do anchor point 05, 05, and then anchor position is going to be what? So we have 320 by 240 for the screen, which is the same for the grid. So we have 320 by 240 for the grid. We have 3 by 2, so 320 is not going to divide evenly, is it? 320 over 3. Yeah. So we have, let's round down and call it 106 pixels wide for each cell. And then 240 divided by 2 is 120. So each of our cells are 106 by 120. By 120. So if we want to get to the center of that, we would basically use half of each of those. What is this? Float is not callable. Yeah, that's right. It's a property, but it does need a topo. And anchor position, anchored position. So half of 106, actually, well, let's just do 106 divided by 2. This double divided by gets rid of the decimal. So that'll put the center of the label in the center of the box that is 106 pixels wide, 120 pixels tall. And that's moving it within the group. The group is then getting added to the layout. So will this be in the center of the cell? It is. It's probably not pixel perfect. I think it's probably not pixel perfect because we had 106.666 whatever, so like we're not accounting for that, but it's pretty darn close. It's definitely way better than it was on that first try. So this is actually a way that this can work without even changing without even changing grid layout at all, this can work this way. The downside to this, though, is you have to hard code the size of the cell, right? I mean, I guess you could get away without hard coding these. You could do something like display width divided by grid size X and then display height divided by grid size Y. Then it's still a little bit more dynamic. I mean, ultimately, you're still hard coding it since your width and height are hard coded. In this case, they're coming from the display. Okay, so I'm going to change this example over to make all the labels work like this one. And then I'll share that with the person who wanted it, because that gets them the outcome that they were looking for without any additional work. And without having to wait for a change to grid layout. But ultimately, I think what I would like to do is make this to where inside the grid layout, you can just tell it, like, maybe it's another argument here, or maybe it's an argument down here when you add the content. One of those two places, you just tell it, like, I want my thing to go into the center. And even better, in a future state, maybe you could even tell it, like, I want it to go into the center, or the left, or the right, or the top, or the bottom. Be nice if you could tell it, like, all the way where you want it to go. And not have to worry about what size the cells are in your actual user code, because the grid layout, internally, it can know what size the cells are, so it can do all of this math for us. So let's refactor this to make all of the labels work like this. So where does everything end up here? You know, the other thing I'm going to do is try to refactor this to use lists. Like, all of these are basically the same. The only difference is which icon it's using. So, like, all of those can pretty much be inside of a for loop. I think all of these can probably be inside of a for loop as well. We'll need counters for these things, but this I'm less worried about, though, right? This is only 6 lines, whereas this is like, 5 or 6 lines per label, and we have 6 labels, so we can cut out a lot of this by using a for loop. So we need a list of the icons we're using. Icons, list. I'm just going to stick inside of here these things. I'm going to split so I can copy paste easier. This is one of my, I have many favorite features of PyCharm. This is one of the features I really like a lot, though, is being able to split the file and copy paste real easy. Or if you need to, like, why is this always pasting back? The other thing you can do is have 2 different files. If you're copy pasting from one file to another, then you can open both. So I don't, if I do this, no, it still goes back. Interesting. Okay, there's our 6. So now I'm going to say, I'm going to make this more generic. And call it grid contents. Buttons. We already have main group. I think I'm gonna cut out buttons. So I mean, this came from the person who wrote the code originally, which is the same person asking the question. I don't know for sure if they'll want all the same naming that I have, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and change it over since I'm the one working on it right now. So instead of making buttons and showing buttons, we made main group. We're showing main group already. So we'll just go main group here. And nothing else uses it, right? Yeah. Oh. Well, yeah, that wouldn't have been doing anything anyway, I don't think. This is old stuff. This is old stuff. These are old stuff. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna be right back in 1 minute. I gotta blow my nose real quick. All right. Much better. Put the chat back on top. Hey, Johnny. We got something unsavory in the YouTube chat. Guessing. Yeah. Thank you for the heads up. Appreciate it. It seems like these seems like this is a common problem right now on YouTube. So we reported it and removed the other one. So hopefully those aren't showing anymore. But yeah, I appreciate the heads up. I don't know if I pause it on YouTube, does it still scroll the chat? I'll keep that one paused there. I'll try to check in a little while. Well, yeah, I've been seeing those on my videos. I've been seeing those on a bunch of other videos lately as well. YouTube needs to step up their moderation game. Like I mean, that's like not even difficult to tell that it's clearly spam. So like, I don't understand why YouTube's not just auto-deleting those, but all right. We got our icons. We're going to use main group instead. We created our layout, pinned it to the main group, which is already showing. Message removed, but still see it. Interesting. Let me see if I have any other options on it. Well, I guess it's partially because it's the person's name or something. Let me also... It didn't make a difference. Okay. Yeah, it may... I'm not sure if it's going to keep showing the name or not. Unfortunately, in this case, their name is also not ideal. The message they posted is not great, but their name is also not so great. Hopefully that's hiding it better for now. I don't think I have any other abilities than that, though. So if it's still showing, unfortunately, I don't think I could do anything about it right now. Nice. Okay. That time I did a report. The first time I did, there were 2 messages. I reported one, and then on the other one, I did hide user from this channel. And I guess that hide user from the channel does not really do what it says, seems like. So now we're going to make a loop for icon in icons. Inside of here, we want to basically do this stuff. We want to make a group. We want to make a label. Cur label. This will be icon. Group append. I'm also going to make cell size tuple display width over cell. Let's go grid size X, display height over grid size Y. These are going to get passed in here. Two. Three. This will give us the cell size. Cur label, anchor point, cur label, anchored position, cell size, nope, 0 over 2, cell size 1 over 2. And that to the group, and then append the group. Grid contents dot append group. Okay, so that's going to loop over all of our icons, create a label for each one, create a group for each one, put the label into the center of the group, or the center of what size the group is ultimately going to be. Since we have to cheat a little bit, the group doesn't actually know its own size, so this is why we end up having to kind of hard code. Center the label in the group, put the group in the grid contents. So now we don't need any of these anymore. We don't really need this anymore because none of them are labels, and so that's just going to fail. Okay, that might get us there. Yeah, got us there. Okay, so this is pretty good. This is really the outcome we're looking for. We're trying to make this as easy as possible to do. So I'm going to take the code as it is now. And share it with the person that was asking about it. And then we'll work on modifying the library to make it easier to do so that you don't actually have to like know the cell size basically. So I'm gonna grab this. I'll just drop it in gist for now. And I'm gonna send this back to this person. So, Dexter, to your question, if you're still curious, splash usually is, there's a lot of examples that use a variable called splash, and they basically use it the same way that I'm using main group right here. They make a group called splash, and then they show it on the display, and then they add all the stuff that they want to see on the display into that group called splash. I don't know what code would be in this instance. I mean, I assume this came from a script, like with a script running. It looks like these are basically everything that you've... Oh, between. Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you said what's the difference between, but not just between. I see what you're saying now, the number. Yeah, that I don't know. My best guess is if you have like a MicroPython const or something, some like number in your code, maybe something is holding... I don't know why it wouldn't have a variable name though. That's kind of weird that it's just like a literal number. I've never seen dir get used like this either though. Usually when I see dir, it's like you pass something in here. I guess by default, this is just giving you dir, like a list of every global in your script. Looks like a bug. Could be. Could definitely be. Okay, so we're gonna say this was tbgers. This is, yeah. I'll ping Anecdata as well. They were talking about this with them a little bit as well. When you run previous code, did you execute anything else before you ran dir, or did you just like go to the REPL and run dir before you did anything else? Gotcha. Oh, that's on a Pi Zero even as well. So that's like cutting edge stuff. I need to get that set up. Yeah, pretty much what K-Match is suggesting is kind of what I want to do, I think. I'm also going to drop a screenshot as well. Fun Awesome is awesome, I agree. Fun Awesome is really cool. I was super stoked to see when that got brought over into CircuitPython. So what do we want? How do we want the API to work? I think it would be cool if you could declare it when you create the grid layout. So like we would have cell anchor point, and this could be a tuple. And so like this would put things in the center. This would put things in the center vertically, but at the top, no. Yeah, we would probably not want this actually. This would be more like what we would want. This would put things in the center horizontally, but at the top, you know, vertically. So basically you could give it one anchor point and it would do that for every cell. Or I also think it would be cool if you could pass it here and this would apply to just the one cell that you're setting with this stuff. And so like if you want all of them to be the same, you can just pass it in the constructor. And if you want different ones to be different, then you can pass it when you add the content. So let's do the constructor first. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the Displayio layout repo because this is where we're going to want the changes eventually. Check out main, pull. Check out -b, cell, anchor, point. From Adafruit main, no track. Okay. So we'll go here, param, cell, anchor, point. Let's go. Tuple. Point used within every cell. Needs to be a tuple containing 2 floats between 0.0 and 1.0. And resolve. So this knows it doesn't exist. So what? Why was that formatted different, I wonder? Maybe PyCharm is not agreeing with black? Guess that's possible. Theoretically, I'm sure I could set it up to where PyCharm uses black, but I don't know how. Anchor point. So by default, we want to just keep the default behavior, which is, it would be 0, 0 for both. That's what the default value would be. We'll keep it on self. See if KMesh said anything. No. So we'll keep a copy of it on self. Now, when we go to, so we still need to know the cell size. So let's go. We have grid size. We have width and height. So maybe we could just make a property. Property cell size def return a tuple with self.width divided by self.grid size 0. Height 1. Okay. So that will give us the cell size. So now we just, when we put the thing into the cell, so this does get thrown off by multiple cell areas, right? Like we're using a 3x2 grid and each cell contains one thing. But you can actually do you could make one cell cover multiple spots in the grid. So we'll need to make sure that works as well when the time comes. It's like these are all cell size 1. But theoretically, you could do like this. So now these are one cell. And if the anchor point was still 0.5, 0.5, we would want this in the center of the two cells together. So also I noticed this says cell size right here, and it's counting in cells, not pixels. But I just created this property called cell size, and it's actually returning pixels. So I don't think we should do that. We should have those be different names. Pixels. There might be a better way to name this, but for now I'm going to do it like this. But the problem still is this is assuming that this is basically only going to give you the size of a 1x1 cell. You would still need to multiply some things if you wanted the size of a 2x1 or 2x2 or 1x2 or anything. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, I think. Layout cells. This is where the meat of all of the logic that actually lays stuff out goes. For each cell in the cell content list. While I'm working on this, I'm just going to print the cell content list, because I don't remember what all's on it. I think it's a list of dictionaries, some different values. But I don't remember what all the values are. We might want to use some of them, so I'm going to do this. We don't want to add that. I'm just using it so that I can run this one. Okay, so we have, a list of dictionaries. Inside each dictionary, we have a content, which is the actual Displayio object, which currently in this example we're using groups, but you could use labels or anything else. We have a grid position, which is in cell units, the grid position. So 0, 0 is the top left cell. We have a cell size. And we have, okay, so those are the three things we have, and we have them for every item in our group. We called layout multiple times, so we got this thing printed multiple times. The last one is the one that contains everything. Okay. So we do have the cell size, which is what we need to multiply out for multi-sized, cells that take up contents that take up multiple cells. I don't know. We should probably try to come up with the terms we want to use and then stick with them. Kind of keep switching around between like should this be considered a cell or should this be considered something else, like an area that happens to cover multiple cells. That's what CSS calls it, I think. An area. Grid area, maybe. But right now there's really not set in stone terminology for a lot of this stuff. Okay, so when we go to lay out the cells, if the content has not already been added to the self instance of the group, we're extending group. If we have not already added this content to our own group, then we're going to go inside of here. Grid size, this is the 3x2 in our case. So this is the number of cells. Grid position we're getting from that dictionary that we just printed. Grid position. This could be refactored. Honestly, it shouldn't be button size anymore. It should be content size. When this was first created, it was kind of created. Kmatch actually made this. The person that was in chat a little while ago. Kmatch made this example originally, and it was made with buttons, with display button, the library. And so it referred to a lot of things as buttons, but I generalized it a little bit so that it can have any kind of things inside of it. So really, this should be like content size, I think, right? This is from the cell, getting the cell size. Keep trying to open terminal, but it's actually in run. Yeah. So let's call those not button anymore. And then we need pixel ones. So one cell, this is the number of pixels horizontally in one cell. We want to multiply that by the cell size, which was in the cell units, not pixel units. So if this is 2, we're going to multiply our pixels by 2. If it's 1, of course, we multiply it by 1 and it stays the same. Okay, so we'll need these values to know where to set the anchored position of our content item. Measured height and measured width. I'm going to turn this print off. I'm going to copy one of these just so if we want to refer back to it later, we can. Doesn't look so great, but that's all right. Take this back out. I don't remember. These are in pixels. I could work through the math and that would tell me, but I think I'm just going to do this for now. Print it out. That way there's no doubt. Kind of like that. Rhymes. Print it out. That way there's no doubt. Format. Nope. We want width first. Height. So this will now print for each one of these. So we'll see 6 printouts, but this will tell us what units these are in. Oh, I can't run this though, right? I need to run this. Okay. Okay, so one thing I notice is that I'm not accounting for the grid lines. I had 106 and 120, but it was actually 106.6, which it seems like maybe rounded up to 107, and then we ended up subtracting 2, which is 1 pixel on the left and 1 pixel on the right for the grid lines. So we will tweak our stuff maybe to subtract those out if we need to. For now, though, we're close enough. So that is in pixels. So if it has a resize function, then call it. Basically, the things that would have a resize function are widget objects from this same library, which you can read all about. There's a lot of really good documentation. Again, that's also thanks to Kmatch. There's a lot of really good documentation. There's a resize function. The idea is that widgets would override this class widget, they would extend it, and then they would define their own resize function. And then I guess maybe we put this into button also. I mean, ultimately button could extend widget, but I don't think it does right now. Yeah, we gave a resize here as well. Okay, so if it has resize, then call it and resize it to the measured height and the measured width, which means if it's a button or if it's something that's resizable, it will make it big enough to occupy the whole cell, minus the padding, basically, because padding gets calculated in this measured height and width. If it does not have resize, then just try setting width and height. And if it fails at all of this, if it doesn't have resize, and if setting width and height doesn't work, then that's fine. We just go on to the next part of the logic using it at whatever size it's at. So like label is a good example. Our label, you cannot change the size of the label. Basically, the way the label works is it's always exactly big enough to fit the text that's inside of it, whether that text is like real text or font awesome text or anything else. Like the label will always be exactly as wide as it needs to be and exactly as tall as it needs to be to fit the text. And in that case, then we still want to be able to add it to our cell. It just won't get resized, so it'll stay whatever size it is. And then this will be especially useful with, being able to center it, right? When the thing is smaller than the cell, then centering it is quite helpful. So that's all fine. We don't really need to change any of this. For widgets that can resize, we still want to do the same stuff. So if it does not have anchor point, this is where we're setting the X and Y coordinates of the Displayio object. So this would be what gets used if you add groups into your grid layout, because group does not have the concept of anchor point and anchor position. So I think one thing that I want to do is we can go ahead and actually do this already. We can go ahead and add to end content or add content, this one, add content. We can also just add already this thing, cell anchor point. Can you do defaults like this? Can I say self dot this? No. Unresolved. So let's just say none. And then we're going to say if we got this passed to us, if it's not none, set this to the one that got passed. Else, if they didn't pass it to us, then set it to the one from self, which is the one that came in the argument in the constructor. So basically, the one you pass in the constructor will be the default, and then you can override it by passing it to the individual things when you add them. And then I think we want to put this on here, cell anchor point. That way we have it in our dictionary, which then allows us to use it up here. Okay. So now I think I want to focus on this logic first. The XY logic is ever so slightly more complex. So if it does have anchor point and anchor position, which is basically label and anything that extends widget, then instead of setting the anchor point to 0, 0, we will just set it to whatever it is in our dictionary. Is that right? So we would need both, would we? Cell anchor point and cell anchor position. I don't really want to add both. I feel like it should be possible to do it with just the one. So do we actually want to set this, or do we want to leave this 0, 0, but just account for it in our position? I think we want to do it that way, actually. Leave this back on 0. And then in our position here, We have grid position X, which is position in cells. So like 0, 0 is the first cell in the top left, 1, 0 is the next cell on the top row, times the width of the entire grid divided by the number of cells we have horizontally. And then we added the padding. So we basically would go and add to that. What would happen if you wrapped the label in a widget instead of adding it to the grid unwrapped? I think that's one approach that could work. I do think that's one approach that would work. Truly, my ultimate wish would be that, like, I really wish that widget, this concept, all the stuff that's in this class, I wish it was in the core, honestly. I wish we had a thing in the core that was basically a special type of group that has a width and a height, because right now group doesn't store its width and a height. A group is just a collection of other Displayio objects, and those other Displayio objects ultimately are represented by rectangles. So, and they have XY coordinates. So like a group could iterate over all of its children and it could find its width and height, I guess, based on their XY coordinates and their height and width. But like by itself, it doesn't have one. And I think it'd be really helpful if it did. And this also would give you anchor point and anchor positioning. That way you can move things around using that same API that label had. So I think that's one solution. We could put whatever our content is inside of a widget and then put it into the grid layout. Yeah, I think it would be possible to do it that way, but I think we can also do it without. Although I guess one thing we could do is, like, in this case, when it does not have anchor point, we could just wrap it into the widget, and then we would be able to set this stuff with the widget. I don't know what the overhead on that is like, but that would be kind of nice. Then we would never have to worry about XY. But I guess these logics are all the same, though. Yeah, these logics are all the same, because everything that doesn't have anchor point, the X and the Y represents the top left of its rectangle. Really, the only object that I'm aware of where XY does not represent the top left is label. And label has anchor point, and we're using anchor point 0, 0, which is making it the top left. So all of this math and all of this math is actually the exact same. So I think we would just add the cell size in pixels times the cell anchor point. And then do we need to subtract? We would need to subtract something. So anchor point times So measured height and measured width, these are actually already the size in pixels of the current cell. This would also be the first one. Times measured width. God dang it. There we go. So I think the problem with this is that it's basically gonna put the top left corner of the content item in the center of the cell, instead of centering the item in the center of the cell. So maybe we do want to also set the anchor point, or else we're gonna have to subtract something from this. Okay, let's save this. Well, we have comma. Okay. So now let's try this. And actually, let me just copy this whole. Let's leave this example alone. Make a new one. Don't want to add it. This one, we're going to turn this on. We're going to set these to 0.5. We are going to not do this for right now. Inside of here, we're not going to make groups. We're going to make the label. We're not going to set these. We're not going to append this. We are going to just append this. No more groups in between. Just add the labels directly to the grid layout. Cell anchor points for all cells this time around will be 0.5, 0.5. I think the problem here is this will be... That is not what I expected. So actually the icons are where I expected them, but the grid lines are not. Because basically what we have right now is the top left corner of the icons are actually in the center of the cells, which is ultimately not what we want, but it's how I expected the code to behave this time around. The problem is that our divider lines, and thus essentially our entire grid, is also shifted. Because the lines are basing themselves off of the XYs, or the anchor positions of the contents. And if we just do this, it's not going to change the grid lines. But it does put the icons to where we actually want them. I'm going to put this back to zeros for now, but we may go back and do that how it just was. Let's see if we can get the divider lines to go where they're supposed to. Boy, this is some ugly formatting. If I undo this, is it going to be mad? Not so far. See what Black has to say about it. So this is if the content does not have anchor point, and in our case the content does have anchor point, so I'm going to focus on that first. This is where it would be really nice. Like if this concept existed in the core, then we could just make it so every Displayio thing extends widget, and then everything would have an anchor point, and we would not have to have this logic everywhere where it's like, if it does not have anchor point, then use XY, and if it does, then use anchor point. And that would be super cool. But for now, we'll focus down here. So this is saying bottom line, location Y. Set to the Y anchored position of the content object plus the measured height plus the cell padding. But really what we want is basically subtract this part back out. So we added it here, and we want to use it here, but we don't want to use it in the lines. Except this is Y, so this would be 1 height. This one is X. We subtract the same thing for all of these? I guess so, right? Every line is moving. This one is X, so it would be width. Okay, then it makes shapes, makes tile grids for each shape. Does that for every side. Adding all the lines. Well, removing all the lines from the group. That way we can go back and re-add all of them. Basically, all the lines get calculated every time you add a new content. And so by setting these now correct, I think, with this minus, everything else should work. Yeah. Okay. This is how I expected it. The top left of our label is centered inside of our grid cell. So obviously it looks messed up. You know, stuff is poking into the other cells. But this is how I expected. So now it would look correct if we did set the anchor point here. That looks correct. And we could override one. Let's say, well, this is the wrong spot though, right? This is the grid layout. Let's say here, if we said the first one, let's make it cell anchor point 0.50. Now the top left cell, it would be centered horizontally, but not vertically. Perfect. Perfect. So that overrided the one from the entire grid. That's exactly what we want. And one thing is, well, let's put all of this stuff. Oh, grid layout's the only thing we changed. Let's take grid layout, put it back into its own. And let's make sure that the actual basic examples still work. Yeah, that looks normal. Okay, so that behavior didn't change at all, which makes sense because the defaults set everything back to how it was before. Okay. So now we just need to handle things that don't have anchor point. Because we fixed this branch of the logic. So we need to, and we fixed this branch of the logic as well. So we need to handle this part and this part. And we'll have to do the same thing, basically. We'll need to minus again down here, because this is referencing the x and the y. And up here, it's setting the x and the y. And so here, we're basically gonna do we just add same amount? It's not the same amount, is it? It's got to be different because this is relative. This is always relative to the top left corner. This is now relative to the anchor point. So let me see, button does not have anchor point and anchor position. It has height and width, and it has resize. I don't actually want it to have resize, truthfully. Okay. This doesn't have resize or anchor point. But it's a tile grid, so it does have XY. So now let's go another copy of this. And now we're not doing icons. Don't need fonts. Don't need label. We never needed terminal IO. I don't know why that was there anyway. Don't need any of that. Now let's just go for I in range 6. I almost wish we had more examples for shapes. There's one example that shows all the shapes. Sometimes I just want to grab one shape though. Okay, blue rectangles. What are all of these? Is this XY width height? Yeah. So X and Y don't matter. It's going to get changed by the grid layout. So these could just be 0. It doesn't matter. Whatever we pass here is not going to be what it's set to anyway. Width and height, this one is 41 by 41. So that sounds fine to start with. Let's make this private. Let's import the right thing. Okay, we're no longer making labels. We're making rectangles, we're appending those. Okay. So what happens without this first? Perfect, that's what we expect without the anchor point. With the anchor point, won't work. Yeah, nothing changes, but that's because we haven't actually implemented the change for XY yet. So that's where we're going to be in here. Because this will get us to the point where the top, well, this will get us back to where the top left corner of the rectangle, in this case, then will be centered inside the cell, but that's not what we want. We want the entire rectangle centered inside the cell. This int also. Okay. Yeah, no. That makes sense because I overrid the other one, right? I did the one different. Let's go ahead and undo that for now. Take this back out. There we go. So now the top left corner of our rectangle is in the center of each cell. So we still have the same problem with the lines that we had last time. And then the other problem that we have is we don't want the top left corner in the middle, we want the middle in the middle. So we also need to subtract half of the size of the content. But this doesn't have a way. Or does it? Does tile grid? Does tile grid have height and width? No. But it knows the height and width because we had to pass it. Yeah. We don't have a way to get the width back out of it. So truthfully, my end goal here would be, honestly, just tile grid should have a property for height and width, and it should just return to you the values that were set when it was initialized. That would require a change in the core. If that change happened, then because rectangle extends tile grid, we would then be able to get the width and the height back out of the rectangle. I don't have as much confidence that I can make that change in the core quickly and have it work. So I think what I'm going to do for now is just do it inside a rectangle. And then it will still be called width and height properties. And then whenever, if ever, we come along and add that to tile grid, we could just remove it from rectangle, and it would rely on the superclasses ones, which get made at that time. So we actually need to modify shape. Interestingly, I think circle is positioned by the center. But it also does not allow you to get the radius back out, which would be the height and the width of the circle. What about on-disk bitmap? Or just bitmap? This has a height and a width that we can get. But the bitmap has to go into a tile grid. And the tile grid doesn't have the height and the width that we can get. We're back into the same problem, actually. Yeah. And on-disk bitmap is the same. On-disk bitmap gets attached to a tile grid, which doesn't have a height and a width. Where's my Displayio stuff? There we go. Yeah, it goes inside of the tile grid. But on-disk bitmap does also have a height and a width that we can get back out of it. So one problem, I guess, is that the width and the height here, this is in tiles, not in pixels. So if we add those properties to tile grid, we actually need to multiply the value in tiles by the tile size. That would give us the full width and height of the tile grid. So I think I'm going to make the change in rectangle. And then later on, maybe I'll try to tackle it in the core, adding a height and a width property to tile grid. Because that would basically make it to where you could add any tile grid into your grid layout, and it would be able to use this functionality. So I need shapes. I'm going to work on rectangle for now. And okay, width and height gets passed to the bitmap. So honestly, this property is actually easy. We can just say return self._bitmap.width and height. Okay. So uninstalled the stock one, which I had before. I installed mine, which I just modified. I don't know why it gave me that error. That's not really related to this, I don't think. Need to get back to here. So let's make sure we're in the same spot. I didn't change anything yet. The top left of our rectangle is in the center of our cell. Go back in here. We now go minus cell content width. Height over 2. Over 2. I don't think we need parentheses here, but honestly, I think it makes the code more clear, so I'm going to add them. I don't know, Pylint or Black might complain, I'm not sure. When I was taught to code, I was taught like use more parentheses. Basically, it's makes the code more explicit instead of relying on knowing the order of operations and getting it correct every time. Okay, I think that's better. I think that's right. I think our rectangles are now centered inside of our cells, but we just have now the same problem as before, which is that the grid lines are not in the right spot. And so we basically just do the same thing we did before, which is when we calculate these, we will subtract all of this. This might need to be a plus now. Oh, also we messed this up. Yeah, we just messed this up. There we go. And we had to do this for all the lines. Continuation line over indented. Well, I told you to format and you didn't change it, so it's gonna stay that way. I don't know, it's the same as this one. My eyes, I don't understand why this one doesn't have the warning, but this one does. That doesn't want to format it. That's width. There we go. This one is Y also. Now the X's. Formatting in here is getting pretty atrocious. Yeah, I don't get why all of these have this warning, but the top one doesn't. Duplicated. Yeah, well, it's gonna happen. I mean, it's not really duplicated though, right? It's different. This is X, this is bottom and X, this is top and Y. This is anchor point 1 instead of, I guess it's saying it's duplicated from, it doesn't show duplicated down here. I don't know. I don't think it's really duplicated. I think they're different. They're similar, but they're not the same. They're not the exact same. So now, are the lines in the right spots? No. So I think that one does need to be plus. Since we flipped the sign basically by subtracting, I think we need to flip the sign here also. Perfect. Okay. Now the rectangles are centered inside the cells. And it would still work if we changed the size of the rectangles. So like 80 by 80 would also work. Whoa. Oh, it closed. Yes. Excellent. Okay. And it would still work if we did this. So centered horizontally and near the top vertically. Well, that's not quite right. Whoops. Now the rectangle, basically the center of the rectangle is going to this anchor point. Which, does this mean also this was gone, and this was gone? Yeah. That's a problem. So it works for centered, but it doesn't work for anything else. This should not be just dividing by 2. That's basically making it so that it only works with 0.5. Instead, it should be multiplying the width by the cell anchor point. Because when it's 0.5, then that's the same thing as dividing it by 2. When it's not 0.5, we want to treat it like whatever it is. And the bummer part of this is now we need to copy paste this everywhere. Maybe. Do we? Threading. Okay, we ended up with not an int. Yeah. Yeah, so now the contents are in the right spot, but the grid lines are wrong again because we're still doing divide by 2. This is why. This is why. This is why. Rest are x. X. We go back and test labels and make sure labels work with things that aren't 0.5. We might have the same problem with labels. Maybe not because of anchor point. This is where it gets rough because like the logic is trying to achieve the same thing with x and y as it is with anchor point. So I get them mixed up in my head. Maybe it's not a problem with label, since it's using anchor point. Yeah, actually, I think that's probably the case. We'll test it though. Okay, perfect. So we're on 0, 0 right now. 0.5, 0.5, centered. Perfect. And 1.0. Oh. Okay. Perfect. And so back to this one and then override one. So let's say one of these. Let's say centered vertically. Let's go back to this. We did this. This is where we first noticed it. 10% down, centered vertically. Yeah. And 1.0 would be at the bottom, but still centered horizontally. Okay. Okay. I think we're there for rectangle. So grid layout, copy this back into here. Let's test labels and make sure those work when they're not 0.5. Yeah, thank you. So let's go back to this one. Okay. Oh. Yeah, well, we're already testing one that's not 0.5, right? We're 0, 0, and that one's working fine. So yeah, that one is, it's not an issue because of the fact that the anchor point on the label is taking care of that, shifting it over by half of the width for us. Let's do this, no default, but one overridden. So now the first one should be in the center horizontally in the top. All the rest of them should be top left inside the cells. Perfect. First one is centered horizontally and at the top. All the rest of them are at the top left. 1.0. So centered horizontally at the bottom for the first one. Okay. I think we're there. So we are working correctly with labels, which I think suggests that we would work correctly with anything that has anchor point and anchor position. We're also working correctly with rectangle from display shapes, which I think suggests that we would work correctly with anything that has no anchor point and position, but instead has XY, and with the one caveat being it does have to also provide a width and a height property, which rectangle doesn't currently, but I added it here. So we'll need to probably PR that. I mean, I don't know how often somebody would want to put shapes into a grid anyway. I think the most common things that a person would put into the grid are like images, either on disk bitmap or image load bitmap, labels, which we worked on already, either labels with text or labels with, font awesome like we saw. or other widgets, other things that override widget. You know, like there's a bunch of them in this repo. I'm actually in the process of moving them out of this repo and into CircuitPython.org. I haven't worked on that in a little bit. I probably need to get back to it. But there's like, you know, switch round, flip input, icon widget. I think all of those are more likely than just shape for a person putting it inside the grid layout. But it's nice to support shapes as well. What if we do an outline? I think that is the logic we want. If we go back to here, go back to our shapes, let's say outline this will keep this consistent. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So round rect do as well while I'm here. This works similarly. We have a bitmap, so we can just use that. I'll do width first. Oh, already got self. Okay. So now if we do this again, uninstall, yes, install. Now here we should be able to go round rect. I didn't set a corner radius. Yeah, okay, we need to pass R. Okay. Where does R go? XY width height R. XY width height R. So we'll call it 10. Yeah, there we go. 20. Sweet. And it still works at different. Let's say 0, 0.5. So all the way left and halfway down. Perfect. Yeah, that one worked. Okay. Okay, so rect and round rect both work. Circle, I don't think would. For one thing, it doesn't provide a width and a height. And the other problem with circle is going to be that maybe circle could work. Circle work? The circle extends round rect. Round rect extends tile grid. So circle has X, Y, and they're relative to top left. But it also has X0, Y0, which are relative to the center. But our code's not trying to use it. So this was my concern, was that X and Y would be relative to the center, but they're actually not. X0 and Y0 are relative to the center. X and Y are coming from parent class round rect, parent class tile grid, which has XY, which is relative to top left. The circle might actually work. If we did this, property def width, do we have a bitmap? We can just do the same thing, or, well, yeah, we do, because it's round rect, right? So, I mean, we could also just do R times 2. Plus 1, I guess. We'll do the bitmap. Let's just do the bitmap. If we can access it. I don't know if we can access it. Maybe we can't access it. Guess we'll see. It does have an underscore bitmap that it's getting from round rect, but it doesn't seem like it can find it. Maybe it's because it's private. I don't know if Pyline's gonna like that. Maybe we should just use a radius instead. Let's try one. Save this. Uninstall. Install. Circle. 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 And again, the things we pass for X0, Y0 don't matter. They're going to get overridden. Radius matters. And so there's no width and height. So X, Y don't matter. Radius, let's call it 40. And we don't have a height. We don't have another radius. X, Y are ignored. Radius. We still have all of those. Well, we're extending round rect. And we already added this to round rect. So maybe we don't need them in circle. Maybe it would just work. Actually, having them is breaking them because it's getting none for something. Yeah, okay. So because circle extends round rect, it actually already works because we already fixed it inside round rect. Perfect. Okay, so we don't need to mess with that, and this just works already. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna PR to shapes. Should have made a branch a long time ago. So we should run pre-commit though, right? Shouldn't just commit this. String. I guess I should do types while I'm here as well, right? Same problem here. I think it's missing. Save. I think I just didn't save. Yeah, there we go. We can do types here. Whoops. Okay. Okay. We added height and width properties for the rectangle and the round rectangle. We're going to push this to foamyguy size properties. Only changes in my commit are these ones. Okay. Okay. On a grid layout, we'll be able to add shapes to the grid. And anchor them. If anybody is up for it and wants to review, once I make this PR, I would love to get a review. All of my testing, of course, was on Blinka Displayio. So if anybody wanted to review it, like on actual CircuitPython, like on a PyPortal or any CircuitPython device with a screen, I would really appreciate that. That way, we have a test that's also on the microcontroller. And if anybody has, ideas for different ways we could do it, I'm all for. All ears on that as well. Yeah, so I'm gonna take this. Maybe let's do 0, 0 on this one so that it's a little more different. Doesn't really matter. I'm just gonna use it as a screenshot, but. Okay. We'll make sure it's gonna pass actions. And then I also want a PR to Displayio layout. Cell anchor point, which is the name of my branch. Take the copy I was working on. I'm pretty sure I already pasted it back, but do it again just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Run pre-commit on this. Oh yeah, we didn't end up using this. The other thing we never did again was test the multi-cell area. It works. I'm not gonna lie, I was not necessarily expecting it to work. So hip hip hooray. So I don't know why we never needed these, but we never needed these. Which means we probably never needed this either, right? Yeah. Because we used measured size? I think it's because we ended up using measured size, which was already doing all this for us. Yeah. I think that's why. One of the lines is missing. Oh, you're right. Oh, stream crashed on us. Yeah, my bitrate's back to yellow. Hopefully it'll just catch up in a minute here. It used to be like a graph I could see over time somewhere. I don't know where that's at. Guess there's one on Twitch. Twitch, it seems like, has come back, so hopefully the stream will be back everywhere else in just a moment as well. Oh, and we have a bunch more of these on YouTube, so that's cool. Okay. Okay. Those are taken care of again. So, why is the line on that one gone? So the line's actually fine. If it's not on the right edge of the display. Is it possible to scale a bitmap? My QR codes are too small for my phone to read unless I scale the top level group. Scaling the group that the bitmap is in is the only way that I know of to scale a bitmap in Displayio. Actually, maybe there's one other way. Maybe this. Bitmap tools. Yeah, bitmap tools roto zoom. This is like a copy one chunk out of one bitmap and paste it into another bitmap, but it can also apply rotations and scales and clipping, like cut out certain parts, leave certain parts in. So if you had a bitmap that is small with a QR code in it, you could make a second bitmap and you could use RotoZoom to copy your QR code bitmap into your new bitmap with a scale of more than one. Like 2 would make it double the size. Depending on how big your bitmaps are, though, you might run out of RAM. Where I think using group would... I don't actually know internally how it works, but I think using group to scale it will save the RAM. Like if your QR code is, let's call it like 100 by 100 pixels, if you scale it with a group, I think you still have basically the same amount of memory as a 100 by 100 bitmap. If you scale it using rotozoom like this, you're going to have the original bitmap, which is 100 by 100 in memory. You're going to have the new bitmap, which let's say it's 200 by 200. That will be in memory. So you'll have both of them, and the second one will be twice as big. So it will consume more memory. You could maybe then get rid of the first one if your whole goal is just to get the big one. And so that would save you back down to just using double the amount of RAM instead of triple. But that would be my one concern using rotozoom. What are the problems that the group scaling creates for you? There might be a way to fix those problems without resorting to rotozoom. Bitmaps I'm using now are 29 by 29. Group will only scale by integers. That's true. Group has to be scaled by whole numbers. What are you were trying to scale it to a half number then? Like 2.5 or something? This I think is integers also probably. Oh no, this says a float. So there's going to be some rounding too though. If you scale by a float, it's going to round somewhere. So your QR code might get distorted. It messes up the layout math. Yeah. I think these are your two options basically. Scale the group, which I kind of lean towards being a better solution, in which case you just have to fix up all your layout math. One thing you could do if you don't have the bitmap in a group by itself, that's definitely something I would recommend, is put that bitmap in a group by itself with nothing else in it, and then that way that group can be scaled and all the rest of your stuff can still be whatever size it is today. If you're already doing that, then yeah, you will probably have to account for it being scaled, which does get weird because like group doesn't have a width and a height. And so it's like virtually twice as big to some things, but not other things. It gets a little complex. But yeah, I think those are the two options. Yeah, I would add an extra group. I would add a group with just the bitmap in it and then add that bitmap group to your top level group. So leave the top level group at scale 1, but make a new group, put the bitmap in it, scale that new group to 2 or whatever you want, and then put that new group in the top level one. And then I think most of the math should turn out the same, but it does still depend a little bit on how, like what you're doing. It may still have to change depending on what's going on. But the only other option I know of is this, rotozoom, which theoretically could work as well. Does seem to support floats, although it will definitely round, and I think would take up more memory, but that's kind of the trade-off. So what if we hide this one? Go 2 on this one. Yeah. I wonder if it's like, we might just be off by 1 pixel, honestly. Because it seems to work fine when the 2 cell area is not on the right side. Why would it be off by 1 pixel though? Let me see if it's actually off by 1 pixel. We can find that out if we just do this, right? Is that true? No, because this is still going to be... What if we do -1 here? So grid layout will be 320, display will be 321. No. Interesting. So is it over there at all? It's maybe just not over there at all. It seems to be just gone. That doesn't make a difference. Let's look at right line lock X. That didn't print anything. This is anchored position ones. So what if we use label? Let's go left side first. That one works. And see, the thing is, this line here on the right of the double-sized cell lines up with the line here. So I'm actually really kind of confused why it would not on the double-sized one. Because when it's not on the right edge, it's fine. If we do this one now, we make this one too. Back to this problem. And so the labels have this problem too. Here's our prints. Those weren't printing because I was in the anchor point half of the logic, not the XY half of the logic. First one is at 106. The next one is supposed to be at 319, which should make it get drawn. So then for the second row, 106, 212, and 319. I don't know about that. I'll have to work on that a little bit. I think I'm probably going to wrap it up here. I got the vast majority of what I was trying to do done. We made an example for tbtbs. We linked that over to him. We updated grid layout so that it can center its stuff. Obviously, we still have a little bit of an issue when you use grid lines and you use cells that are multiple cells, wide. What does it do? Let's try multiple cells tall, actually, real quick. Curious about that. Let's say, put this one back, take this one out and make this one 1 by 2. Now we're missing on the bottom. And I messed this one up. This should be 1 by 1. Wrap the QR code in group scale 3. Nice. Perfect. So yeah, now this one is missing it on the bottom. So basically, if you have a multi-cell area and your multi-cell area touches the bottom or the right of the grid layout, and you're using grid lines, then your grid lines on the bottom or the right don't get drawn. But if you're using single cell areas, they do get drawn. And if you didn't have grid lines on, you would never know that this is a problem. Like if you didn't have grid lines on, everything would probably still look fine, right? If we turn divider lines off. It's probably still off by 1 pixel somewhere, but unless you're like really counting pixels, you would never know. So it's specifically with divider lines, with multiple cell sized areas, and with that multiple sized one touching the bottom or the right. So that's kind of my thing to try to fix next. So I'll try to do that. I'll probably try to get that done before I PR to grid. Before I PR to grid layout. But that's pretty much my plan, is to try to get that fixed, PR this to grid layout, and then I could share with tbgers the update to grid layout library, which allows them to do what they're after a little bit easier, since they can just specify the 0.5, 0.5, and not have to hard code the cell sizes like they did before. And then longer term, what I really also want to do that's kind of related to this is modify the core so that tile grid can return width and height. Because then we could undo our changes in shape. Everything would still work. Plus, we get the benefit of anything that goes into a tile grid would then work inside our grid layout as expected with the anchor point, which would be really cool. So that'll be my long-term goal in the core, is to try to do that with tile grid. But I think that's going to do it for now. So I appreciate everybody that hung out in the chat and anybody who's watching along. Dexter, Deshipu, Johnny. That's all we had who hung out in the chat here with us, but there may be other folks watching. I appreciate all of you. I will catch you next week on same time. So Saturday, 10 a.m. Central Time. That was about 3 hours ago is when I started, and I stream at that time every Saturday. So check back in the live broadcast room. I always post links there when I'm getting ready to go on. So you can find me there, and I'll see you then. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Dexter. I appreciate it. Definitely has been fun. I had fun working on this. So this is kind of like, this is my bread and butter. This is the stuff I really like to work on. It gets frustrating a little bit because it's like, you know, a bunch of math and a bunch of pixels and stuff. But this is the kind of stuff that I find most interesting. So I had fun working on it as well. All right, folks, I will see you next time.